In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a WordPress website with a domain name on Rocky Linux, and this is going to be on top of an Apache web server. I had a video prior to this about setting up a LAMP server, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP on Rocky Linux, so check that out first. But if you already have Rocky Linux and Apache running, then you're good to go. The only other assumption I'm going to make is that you have a domain name. And if you do not, you can get them from pretty much anywhere. I use Google Domains and Namecheap for some of my domain names, but just make sure you have a domain name as well. Okay, on that note, I am logged into my remote server here at this IP address, and let me just show you that I am indeed running Rocky Linux. So we'll look at the etc os release file, and that tells me that I'm running Rocky Linux version 8.5. With the domain name, I'm logged in to this server via this IP address, but basically we want to tell the domain name to point to the IP address of our server. We can do that with a DNS record. So let's take a look at that real quick. I bought my domain name from Namecheap, and the domain name that we're going to be working with is tonys.surf. And what I did was I came into the DNS section for my domain name and added an A record for the domain name itself, right? Just tonys.surf as indicated by this @ symbol. And that's the value of that is the IP address of my web server. And the same thing for www.tonys.surf. I have that also pointing to the IP address of my web server. And, you know, this interface is what Namecheap looks like, but it's going to look something a little bit different for you depending on where you got your domain name from. But just make sure you go ahead and do that initially. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and install WordPress. So let's go to our var www directory, and in here we want to add another directory called WordPress. We have our basic HTML directory, CGI bin directory. We're going to download the official WordPress package and then make a directory in here for that to live. So we can do that with the curl command, and basically this command looks something like this. Whoops, I forgot the CU. So we're going to use curl to download the latest package from the official WordPress website and put it on our system in a file called wordpress.tar.gz. So there is that file. We can unpack it with tar xf and then the name of the file, wordpress.tar.gz. And like I said, that's going to make its own folder here called WordPress. We're done with this tar file, so we can remove that with rm wordpress.tar.gz. And are you sure you want to remove it? Yes. Okay. And the thing about this, though, is if we look at the ownership of this file, nobody owns it right now. Literally nobody, the user, and nobody, the group, owns it. Let's change that. Let's have the web server own it. And we can do that with chown, change ownership. And we're going to recursively change ownership to the Apache user and the Apache group to everything under the WordPress directory. So that's the recursive flag says this directory and every file and folder under it are going to be owned by Apache user and group. So let's execute that and double check that it worked. And it did indeed work. So Apache user and group are now owning that directory. Similarly, we want to change the permissions, or we want to make sure that the permissions are what WordPress recommends. So for directories under WordPress recommends a permissions of 755. Okay, so type directory, everything under here, we're going to change the permission to 755. Now for files, WordPress recommends permission 644, right? So type F for files, everything under this directory we're going to give permission 644. Okay, so that should be good after that command completes. Let's go ahead and move on to configuring our web server. So our web server in this case is Apache, so let's go to the etc httpd directory, and in here you have your basic install. The directory we'll be working under is the confd directory, so let's go to that directory, conf.d. And in here you might have couple different configuration files, but we're going to make a new configuration file for WordPress specifically. So I'm going to use the Vim text editor. You might have a preference for another text editor. Just feel whatever you're comfortable, or just use whatever you're comfortable with. So I'm going to make a file here called wordpress.conf, and I'm going to copy and paste this virtual host block. So, and you can do something very similar. You'll just have to make a couple updates. So we're listening on port 80. Our server name is our domain name, tonys.surf. Our server alias is www.tonys.surf. And like we were working with before, our document root is at var www WordPress. And then we have some security permissions, directory blocks here, or just one block. And then we have our log files down here. So let's go ahead and save that. And to apply those changes, we can restart the HTTP service. So system ctl restart httpd. And just to make sure we didn't screw anything up, we'll do a system ctl status httpd. And if there's a syntax error, the server would complain about it. It would probably not be running anymore, but it is, so we should be good to go. At this point, let's go ahead and move on to working with the database. Let's set up an empty database, and then later on in this tutorial, we'll tell WordPress where that database is, so then WordPress can go ahead and write its information into that database. So we can do that with MySQL. If you have a password for your MySQL database, you're going to want to specify that. So my user for this is root. And then I can do the -p flag, which will prompt me for a password. Oops, I spelled MySQL wrong. MySQL. Okay, so I'm going to type in my MySQL root password. And now this is the Maria database / MySQL command prompt. So what we can do in here is create a database, and the name of my database is going to be called dbname. Choose whatever database name is appropriate for you. And then I'm going to create a user. My database user's name is going to be db_user, and his password is db_password. Now, I recommend you choose a much stronger password than this, but for the sake of example, that's what I'm going to go with. And as far as privileges are concerned, I'm going to grant all privileges to this database user with this database specifically, and all tables associated with that database. So let's do that. And then we will apply those changes with flush privileges. And we will exit out of the Maria database command prompt. Now, if we go to a web browser and go to assuming that we have everything set up as far as our DNS, let's go to our URL, so tonys.surf, and see what we get here. So your PHP installation appears to be missing the MySQL extension, which is required by WordPress. Now, there's a subset of PHP modules that WordPress requires you have installed, and one of those is the MySQL extension. Some of those other ones are in this list right here, so we're going to use the DNF package manager to install not only the PHP MySQL extension, but these other ones, which I don't have it available, but these are recommended by WordPress. So let's go ahead and install those. They don't take up much space at all. Oops, ImageMagick. Maybe I spelled that wrong, but we'll look into that a little bit later. Let's install that subset. And yeah, we'll install these and the dependencies associated with those. And that won't take long at all. There we go. So go back here to tonys.surf. Tonys.surf. And that will now get by that error message that we saw before, and we can proceed with the installation of WordPress. So let's go ahead and do that. The database credentials that we created earlier, let's input those here. So db what did I call it? DB name, DB user, DB password, and that looks good. So we'll click on submit. And this is the first instance where we will see SELinux preventing us to, how should I say this? Let me explain. So when you have Rocky Linux, there is something built into the operating system called SELinux, which is a security module, let's just say that, and it's preventing us from modifying, it's preventing WordPress from modifying the WP config file. So we basically have to tell SELinux to allow WordPress to make changes to that file. So we can fix that pretty easily with this command right here, chcon -r, and basically this http dsys read write content flag will be applied to every file under the WordPress directory, which is indeed where this wp config.php file exists. So let's go ahead and execute that. And let me just show you that that's where that file exists. So var www WordPress, I don't think we looked in here yet. This is where all of those WordPress install files, including your index.php file and the wp config file, which that one doesn't exist, it's trying to create it, so that's why it was having trouble writing. Anyway, with this fix applied, let's go ahead and provide those database credentials again. So db name, db user, db password, and submit, and we should be able to write that wp config file. Let's see if we can spot that here. This one. So there's our wp config file, which was just written by the script. So let's go ahead and proceed with the installation. The site is going to be Tony's Surf. Username Tony Teaches Tech. I'll go ahead and copy the password that it is providing me. I'll put that down here. And then my email, type that in, and let's install WordPress. So that won't take long at all. We can log in with the credentials that we just created. So Tony Teaches Tech and that password. And this will take you to your WordPress admin dashboard. This is the heart of your customization for WordPress. I won't get into that in this video, but if you go to the main website, tonys.surf, that's what that looks like. If you want to go back to the WordPress admin dashboard, you can go to your URL /wp-admin and hit enter. And in here, I always think it's good practice when you have a fresh install of WordPress to check out the site health. And this is especially important because SELinux, as you can see here, is preventing some things from functioning correctly, including the REST API. And you can see these are all related to curl error 7, HTTP request failed. So like we did before with SELinux, there's another workaround fix that we have to pretty much issue to allow WordPress to play well with SELinux and vice versa. So back on our command line, if we use the set SEBool command to set this Boolean value to true, which is HTTP can network connect. If we execute that, we can come back here to our site health, and those critical issues should go away. One recommended thing that remains improvement is to install an SSL certificate, and I have a video on that which you guys should check out next. I also have a video called 15 important things that you should do after installing WordPress, so check that out as well. And if you do, I will see you guys over there.